All right, let's say you wanted to get some sides of a triangle and you want to tell whether or not it's a right triangle, whether or not it has a right angle. And that's useful because then you can do stuff like all of these formulas and all of these theorems that work with right triangles. But there's a nice way to do that and there's an ugly way to do that. I typed up the ugly way. Okay, I've got triangle 1 side A, triangle 1 side B, side C, and then we got 2, and then we gave them a name because we got to say something. And then I got a function where you put in these arguments. You say, okay, here's A, B, and C, and here's the name, because we don't want to just say true or false. We want to say, like, oh, triangle 1 is a right triangle. And then it does the stuff. And if I hit run, it works, I think, if I didn't typo. Triangle 1 is a right triangle, because 3, 4, and 5 are what you call a Pythagorean triple. They happen to work like that. And then triangle 2 is not, because 5, 11, and 13 don't fit that way. And you could look at this code and you could say, hey, it works. I hit run. It gives an answer. It happens to be the right answer. And I'm done. But if you were ever going to use this again, you know, if you're going to open this in a week and use it for another triangle or add to it or share it with somebody, the person you share it with or the future version of yourself is going to hate this, because look what happens when you need to call that function is you have to give it the side A and the side B and the side C and the name, and you have to remember to do it in order, and you have to pile on all these long variables with all these underscores, and they all look the same. Like when I glance at this, my eyes kind of turn fuzzy, like when I'm looking at one of those magic eye pictures that's really a boat hiding in the static or something. So we want to avoid this. We want to say, come on, man, there's got to be a better way. Something that's readable and something that a human could open up next week and add another one, add another feature, try it with different numbers. Like imagine you were going to do triangle 1 and you're like, okay, I got to change this and this and this, and you would definitely mess it up. So whenever we have something like this where we've got variables that are connected, or they should be connected, like triangle 1 side A, triangle 1 side B, triangle 1 side C, and even triangle 1 name, those are going to be packaged. Like whenever I send them to a function, I'm probably going to send all of them together every time, and usually in the same order. And whenever I do the same with triangle 2, there's no reason for me to pile on all 4 of them and type that and give myself a chance of messing it up. I would rather package them into one thing, okay? The name for this is data clumps. If you have little guys who hang out together and you're always putting them together when you send them to a function, or you're always mentioning them in the same line, creating them around the same time, those are called data clumps. And what the cure for that is putting them in an object. Okay, putting them in an object where instead of just coincidentally related variables with coincidentally similar names, they're actually connected and they're actually put together in the code. So I'm gonna keep this for demonstration purposes, and I'm gonna go open a new version to type in, and I'm gonna say, all right, let's do this a better way. Let's do this a way that still works. In fact, it's gonna work exactly the same. The output's not gonna change, but anybody looking at the code is gonna have a happy experience instead of a terrible one. So let's imagine we've got a class called triangle, and it's going to hold these numbers, and then it's going to use them when we need it. So we're probably going to go with the init first, and when we create one of these guys, we're going to go A, B, and C, and name, and probably we could do something like make them optional or add some defaults, but for now we'll stick with the super simple version. And that means we just have a couple lines where it takes in what it gets sent and sticks them into these self variables or attributes, so that now if I want to stop there, maybe the class triangle could add more stuff, but let's say I want to stop there and that's all it does. It just holds on to 4 pieces of info. I could still say, all right, let's create one. Triangle 1 equals triangle 3, 4, 5, and then the other guy was, this one doesn't matter as much because they were not good. And you see how I was doing the arguments with no space, because early on they were so long and so squished together. Now we can give them a little room to breathe just because there aren't so many and they're not so ugly. And then we can delete that. That's the most wonderful feeling, when you can look at a big ugly block and just hit backspace, you know? It's very nice. So now we could stop there and just treat these as a package. Put all these guys into those slots. And let's see, we might need to give something like object.a and object.b. That's not a special word, I'm just making that up, but I think it'll work. And then we could say, hey, you know what? We're going to send you the whole object, and you break it apart and look into its attributes. But actually, what I'm going to do instead is move this guy into the class. Move this guy into the class to say, all right, we're just going to ask you, hey, are you a right triangle? And we don't even have to take info and send it from one place to another. We just say, hey, look at yourself. Take a good look in the mirror, triangle. Are you a right triangle or not? And so then it's going to say, all right, you know what? We could do this right here, or we could do this right here and just immediately say, hey, when we create it, just check whether or not we're right and just mark that down, you know? And then say, all right, buddy, use that. So this is cool because the class sort of handles its own business. We can say, hey, here's your info, here's your sides, and here's a name, and you hold on to that. If we ever come back to you and ask you if you're a right triangle, just let us know. And then we could say, hey, are you a right triangle? I think that's how we, yeah. And we'd give it a cooler name, since we have it attached to the object. I would probably shorten this a bit, but let's say, you know, oh, there we go. Now, it works. It is, in my opinion, a lot easier to read when I see, hey, there's a class that has these and it does this, and then we create some and use them. A lot more sort of piecewise, doing things in chunks. Like, it makes sense to do this all in one chunk. It makes sense to have this ready to go. It makes sense to create them and then ask them. But the real advantage is not just right here. The real advantage is, what if we're going to make another triangle? Well, that's a single line. What if we're going to ask it, are you right or not? Well, that's a single line. What if we're going to add a new attribute, like, are you isosceles? Are you obtuse or acute or whatever? Then we can add that to the object or to the class, and then every object will automatically have it instead of some external thing, and we send it the info and it sends us back. That's fine, but this is a lot more, in my opinion, this is a lot more consistent with how your brain works. You think of an object and it has certain qualities and it has certain things it can do, rather than you think of an object as a list of some random variables, and then you put those together sometimes, and then you send it to another function externally. Not quite the same. So this may or may not be shorter. I didn't count the number of lines, but it's a lot simpler, even if we have one or two more. Now, what I'd like you guys to do is a similar thing for this idea. Let's say we've got this program where you got a player and another player. This is from some game, theoretically. And the players have a name and they have a score, and we're just assigning the score, but you can imagine that in the course of the game it would get +1 and -1 depending on what they did. And then we're going to say who wins. We're going to say, all right, this person has X amount of points. He or she wins. Oh, look at that. I must have forgot something since it was doing win and tie. Yeah. So right now I have this chunk of code for you guys, and it works. It does say the name and the points, and it does say she wins, which is, even though it's several lines away, it is connected to that person. But I want you guys to put it in a class to say, hey, here's a person, and a person has these qualities. It has a name, score, pronoun, maybe some other things later, and maybe it has some things it can do. And then instead of doing these long variables with lots of underscores and copy pasting the if, elif, and getting it wrong and forgetting the el like I did, and hopefully getting the greater than or less than right, and hopefully changing the person 2 to the right person 1. Instead of that, we can just say, hey, here's a person, and here's a person, and we're going to work with them, and they'll handle their own qualities, and they'll tell us what their name is, and they'll tell us what their score is when we need it, and they'll keep it organized instead of just hoping to get all the names right when we type the long thing. So your version after that might be longer, and that's okay. I think it'll be shorter actually, but it might be more lines. There's nothing wrong with more lines if it has a flow. If it has a concept of like, hey, we're creating this thing, putting all this data in there, and then we're coming back to it whenever we need that data that it's holding on to. And that is fine. If it ends up being, this is 13 with 1 blank, if it ends up being 16 with 1 blank, or 18 to 3 or whatever, that still might mean it got simpler, because maybe they're not so long. Maybe it doesn't involve copy paste and missing an elif like I said. Maybe it doesn't involve a giant block like this, where it's hard to keep track of which one are we switching but for, blah, blah. maybe it has more functionality. Like once you've got the class, you could use it for this, but you could also use it for 10 other things. And that's the idea. I want you guys to take this code and use the advantages we have instead of trying to just hope we remember everything in the right order. Thanks.